The What's Neat This Week podcast is supported by enthusiastic model railroaders just like you. Additional support is provided by Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Check them out. Their website is ohrtracksupply.com. Thank you very much, Jeff Otto, for your support. This is the What's Neat This Week podcast for Sunday, November the 5th, 2017. This is podcast number 15.5, our special edition. This is the week that we actually get the week off and we don't do a live podcast, but next week we're going to be back with podcast number 16. Now for this weekend, what I want to do is give you a little bit of a follow-up on a question that was asked at about show 13 in the reader's comments section, which we answered the question on show 14, and this was to do with the gentleman that was discussing building a layout and spending money on having a design built, and he had bids between $600 and $2,000 to have folks design a layout for him. And we kind of discussed my theories and Daniel's theories, and I think Mike Buddy added a little bit to his thoughts on layout design at the time. And so we're going to run a segment at the end of this podcast that will show a presentation that I had made on my experiences with layout design. I'll add and bring into this 5,000 square foot layout that I designed one time. When I actually, right before I started the Midwest Valley Modelers layout, I had the full intent of building this because I was in the real estate business and I had access to a lot of space that was vacant. And it was just something that I wanted to put together, but it turned out that a modular layout was more manageable for me at the time and at the age and at the budget that I had at the time. But let me go into it just a little bit more about December. December's video, I've just about finished it up, and that's the What's Neat show over at Model Railroad Hobbyist Magazine. I've got to do the opening for that show in just a few minutes after I'm done recording this. But in December, it's Turbine Month. We discuss the Athearn slab and the Athearn veranda turbine. We look at the brand new Tsunami 2 sound system that they've created for all three types of turbine that Union Pacific had out there. We also look at Shane Wilson's ScaleTrains.com three-piece turbine. And we also do another segment where we compare the sound systems and allow you to see what they sound like, because they're both fascinating to listen to. We also resurrect a tank car out of the trash and do something kind of cool with that. But I will tell you this, we did that LNWI system from Digitrax. This is the Wi-Fi LocoNet interface that you can hook up to your Digitrax system. And I got to tell you what, it is just so amazing. I've got it set up here in my cell phone, and I am sold on this thing. My biggest thing that I love about it is I can get to all 28 functions by simply swiping my fingers. So when I shoot these soundtracks videos at about 3 o'clock in the morning tonight, all I've got to do is hit F16 to be able to turn on the turbine sounds on the Tsunami 2 turbine, and I don't have to sit there and fuss around with my throttle and try to figure out how to get to that level of function buttons. It just, the cell phone seems to make it so much easier using this Digitrax system. And in fact, I put this in Mike Buddy's hands Saturday night when we were running trains. At first, over here, when he just got here, I put it in his hand, tried to put it in his hand. And Mike's like, no, I could not get him to hold it. But finally, over here in the switch yard, when there was a train running, I handed Mike Buddy the throttle. And by the time he got 3/4 away around the room, I put a video camera in front of his face to find out what his impressions were of it. Watch this clip real quick. This is from Saturday night. What are you doing, Mike?
I'm running a train with my cell phone.
No way, you? Seriously,
Yeah.
Mike, how did you learn? Oh, that's the new system from Digitrax
This
you're
is
using.
the one that Daniel Coombs was
All right,
showing
what do you
us.
think about it, first impression? And we can't believe we see you using this, but shoot,
It's pretty awesome, man. I never thought I'd be liking DCC, but if you can just do this with this, I'm all for it, man.
it's cool, Mike.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel.
So needless to say, Mike's hooked. The simplicity of this brings a fella from DC into DCC, and at this point Mike's excited about getting involved in it. So we'll have Daniel go over to Mike's house and help him set up a system at some point. Now let's get into what we're going to do for the end of the show, and that is we're going to discuss a little bit more about layout construction. And one thing I want to revert to, and what I've done through the years, is I've collected a multitude of publications that are in the model press. For example, Bachman created this book on Easy Track and how to set up track patterns and create various track layout scenarios using their Easy Track, including sketches and drawings. Atlas also makes a very large array of track plan diagram books using their HO scale, N scale, and O scale track. I know that because during the 2-year tenure that I worked with Atlas on photography, I actually had to use those books and build a couple of O scale layouts so that when I photographed them, they were representative of what those layouts were that they had in their books. So it was a really neat thing. Another great publication, our great friend Tony Kester over at Kalmbach Publishing. God love him. He's such a nice guy. Tony does this model railroad planning every year. I've probably got 15 of them over there on my shelf. He's been doing this for a year. And this is really a book that encompasses basic and very advanced layout planning. The drawings and the material that's in these books are priceless. You could probably find back issues on eBay. That's a resource. Another great resource is from the great John Armstrong. Now, this is not only one of the coolest model railroad photos on the hood of a diesel I've ever seen. I'd love to get permission to do a shot like this sometime, but it's already been done, so what's the point? Magnificent photograph on this track planning book. This is an older book, but it's been revised many times from Kalmbach Publishing. It's worth checking out. I've got another old book here from John Armstrong. I think this probably dates into the 50s. You can find one of these online. This is an Atlas/John Armstrong book on how to use a lot of the Atlas products to make track patterns and what have you. It's a neat book. The other books I found on my bookshelves here is one from Lynn Westcott. Actually, I've got two of the same here. This is the first and second edition of this Lynn Westcott series of books on bench work and layout design. Another good series of books to get a hold of. And the last thing I've got is from the great Andy Sporandio. God love him. Freight Yards. This was a really good book because when we planned the Midwest Valley Modelers layout, it was apparent to me that I didn't know anything about switch yards other than you pull a train in and you park it. Receiving tracks, departure tracks, having an area to break up and make the trains and then put a train on a track ready to go out, ready to have another train come in and take its place. There's a lot of planning for operation with regards to that, and this book discusses a lot of that material. If this one isn't in production, I haven't checked the website to see if it is. I guarantee you can also find one of these on eBay. So at this point, that's going to end what I've got pretty much to say on this podcast 15.5. Let me run this video now that ran in Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine. It was sometime in the last quarter of 2015. I recall that. I'm sorry Daniel's not here to tell me what show that was in. But check this out. This is a 4-minute video clip on a piece that I did about layout planning. We're going to talk about designing this layout. We're going to talk about compasses. We're going to talk about just that piece of straight track and running your trains back and forth on it. My first piece of straight track was back in 1973. I would sit in the living room with my father at 6 o'clock at night. We'd be watching Star Trek, and I'd be sitting on the floor with my 3-foot piece of track and one of his, I think it was an AHM E unit, a B&O E unit, and I sat there and I just slid that back and forth on that track, and my mind, I designed my own ideas of a layout at the time, which was simply a circle, but what a great way to start out with a straight piece of track and a locomotive on a piece of foam and just go ahead and slide. One other thing, most of the books that I've mentioned about layout construction, most of those books were published really before foam became a building material that we used. I mean, foam has been around for only about 20 years, and that has really changed the design of a layout. If you design open grid bench work with 1x4s, it's almost impossible to plan how much lumber you need unless you actually draw that out on a piece of paper. Even simple sketches can help you come up with the amount of lumber to build. But foam has changed everything where I don't even use open grid bench work anymore. All I use is a simple tabletop with the trains sitting on top of foam on top of that. If you've seen any of the What's Neat videos that have ran at Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine, I've shown you a lot of segments on how I've built my layout. Also, I have a layout construction video at kenpatterson.com that really shows what I went through 8 years of building this layout. I documented all of that and covered all of that in that video. So now I'm talking way too much. Let's look at this video clip of how to design a layout. For this segment of What's Neat, this is going to be our layout construction segment where we discuss layout design. And I had an open house for the St. Louis RPM meet, which you'll see a lot of that in this show. And at that show, somebody said, "Oh, I'm working on my track layout design. I'm planning a layout. How do you design the track plan for your layout, Ken?" And there was silence. I literally didn't freeze up. It's just that there was so much information in one simple question like that. The answer could have gone on for an hour. And I'm going to try to give the answer right now, simply as I can. And a lot of times, I tell you, my first train layout that I ever had, my Sears and Roebuck Tyco train, which I've still got the original locomotive from that set, that came with a configuration of a circle and a siding. So it was really easy with planning that layout, simply because I was 8 years old, and to have a loop of track with a train on it was a dream. So that was my track plan. And what I did was I built off of that with buildings and experimental scenery, and slowly incubated with that and learned a lot about how to make a layout scenery and stuff. And that really helped me a lot. But today I'm designing a shelf layout here that you can see. And it's very similar to another shelf layout. In fact, these are both going to be interchangeable. And while designing this section of layout, it's come to my attention that it's really the need of being able to get the cars into this area, be able to get the engine back out, to be able to turn the engine around, to have the negotiating operational abilities of your train. That dictates the track plan on this, but also it's really the structures. Now I've got a train station here, I got the base for it that I think would, go really nice in this area to balance things out. I've got a freight depot here, just kind of another nice kit that we're going to build. I've got the footprint of that kit laid out, and that's dictating where the sidings go. That dictates how I'm going to freelance this scene and lay this design out. Now, there's major things really that come into play with designing your layout, and that is, how are you going to use your layout? Are you going to use it for operation, where you need a lot of switching and industry and what have you, and then you place your buildings around that? Or are you modeling like I do for my home layout? I model for the run-by effect, where I can go to any one given scene that I've chosen to model for the prototype locations, and I can literally stand there like I'm watching a train and rail fan in my own basement. The one important things that really dictate a layout and its design is your minimum radius. What type of equipment do you have? What's the biggest engine you've got? And what's the minimum radius that power is going to be able to get through? So your radiuses dictate your track plan. Another important thing to think about, and this really came into play about 20 years ago, I designed a layout to try to find out what would fit into a 5,000 square foot space. And I wanted to build a layout where I had Union Station, a switch holding yard, things like that you would find here in town, and model the suburbs of St. Louis and the farmland and da-da-da-da-da. But what this really instilled into me was, in designing this, it was the radiuses that dictated the design, but it was also the aisle space. So if you've got a home layout, you can usually have aisle space as low as 2 feet, but if you've got a public area, you want 4 to 5 feet of aisle space. So between the aisle space and the minimum radius, by putting those two together with a compass on a piece of paper and trying to fill up a 5,000 square foot building, it taught me a lot about what was needed to be thought about for designing your layout. So that's kind of something that really I thought about a lot when the gentleman asked me that question. It's a question that's got a multifaceted answer. When I designed the Midwest Valley Modelers Model Railroad Club, that was a modular club designed for public display. The design of that was you had to have a lot of trains running quickly all the time. So double track main line with realistic scenery was what my goal was. You also had to have a holding yard to hold a lot of trains so that people could bring their trains, set them up, and then run them for the show. So it was really the design of showing off the layout that dictated the track plan and design of a modular type of a layout. So there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of facets, a lot of interesting things to think about when somebody asks you, how is it that you design your track layout? And that's what I wanted to talk about on this segment of What's Neat, was designing and track planning your layout. I know I could go on for hours talking about layout design, and in future podcasts we probably will. Now next week we're going to have a special segment also on the podcast about TrainFest. TrainFest is coming up this weekend in Milwaukee. It's probably going to be a very big show this year, and we're going to have a special correspondent, our own Chris Palomares, reporting from the show and showing us some of the new products that are at the show. And with that, this ends podcast number 15.5, the special edition, our week off. off November 5th, 2017. Like, dislike, answer questions, ask questions on the reader feedback. We really like answering the questions on the show. We enjoy that segment, and we're going to do an awful lot more of that. So with that, I'm Ken Patterson. Thank you very much for watching.
Clean and things running perfect.